The morning air felt cool against Running Wolf's skin as he stepped quietly through the tall grass. At 22 years old, he moved like his father had taught him. Every step careful, every breath controlled. The sun was just starting to peek through the pine trees, painting everything in soft golden light. Running Wolf belonged to the Lakota people, and these hunting grounds had been in his family for more generations than anyone could count. His grandfather used to bring him here as a small boy, teaching him which plants were good for medicine and where the rabbits liked to make their homes. Now, as a grown man, he came here alone to check the snares he had set the day before, but lately things had been changing. White settlers were moving into the area, building their wooden houses and marking off land with fences. Running Wolf had seen their smoke rising from chimneys in the distance. His people talked about it around the evening fires, wondering what it would mean for their way of life. As he walked along the creek, Running Wolf noticed fresh tracks in the mud, not from any animal he recognized, but from the leather boots the white settlers wore. Someone had been here recently, probably looking for water or maybe berries. The creek was known for the sweet blackberries that grew along its banks. The forest was unusually quiet this morning. Usually, Running Wolf could hear birds singing and small animals moving through the underbrush. But today something felt different. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, the way it did when danger was near. His grandfather had always told him to trust that feeling. Then he heard it, a sound that made his blood run cold. It wasn't quite human, but it wasn't quite animal either. It was the sound of pure terror, the kind that comes from deep in someone's throat. When they're face to face with death, Running Wolf moved quickly but quietly toward the sound. As he got closer, he could hear heavy breathing and the sound of claws scraping against wood. Through the trees he saw something that made his heart race. A mountain lion, bigger than any he had ever seen, was crouched low near a fallen log by the creek. The animal's muscles were tense under its tawny coat, its tail twitching back and forth like a whip. Its yellow eyes were fixed on something behind the log, and Running Wolf could see the predator getting ready to spring. That's when he saw her, a young white woman pressed against the fallen tree, her blue dress torn and dirty. She looked to be about his own age, with light brown hair that had come loose from whatever style she had worn it in that morning. Her face was pale with fear, and Running Wolf could see scratches on her hands and arms from thorns and branches. The woman had obviously been picking berries when she stumbled into this terrible situation. A wicker basket lay overturned nearby, purple berries scattered across the ground. She must have been backing away from the mountain lion and gotten trapped. When her long skirts caught on the rough bark of the fallen log, Running Wolf quickly understood what had happened. The mountain lion had made a kill somewhere nearby, probably a deer or elk, and was protecting its territory. The woman had wandered too close without realizing it, and now she was trapped between the angry predator and the fallen tree. The big cat's ears were flat against its head, and it was making a low, growling sound that seemed to come from deep in its chest. Running Wolf had hunted mountain lions before, and he knew this one was about to attack. The woman had maybe seconds before the animal would leap without thinking about his own safety. Running Wolf reached for the bow slung across his shoulder. His fingers found an arrow from the quiver at his side, and in one smooth motion that he had practiced thousands of times, he notched it and drew back the string, but he couldn't get a clear shot. The woman was too close to the mountain lion, and if his arrow missed or if the animal moved at the wrong moment, he might hit her instead. He needed to get the cat's attention first. Running Wolf took a deep breath and let out a sharp, piercing war cry that echoed through the forest. The sound was loud and sudden, cutting through the morning air like a knife. It was a sound his people had used for generations to intimidate enemies and announce their presence in battle. The mountain lion's head snapped around toward Running Wolf, its yellow eyes now focused on this new threat. For a moment, the big cat seemed confused, not sure which danger to deal with first. That moment of hesitation was exactly what Running Wolf needed. The arrow flew straight and true, striking the mountain lion in the chest, just behind its front leg. The animal roared once, a sound that seemed to shake the very trees, then collapsed to the ground. The whole encounter had lasted less than 30 seconds. but it felt like a lifetime. Running Wolf waited a moment to make sure the mountain lion was truly dead before approaching. He had seen wounded animals suddenly come back to life and attack, and he wasn't going to take any chances with the woman's safety. The white woman had slumped to the ground, her back still against the fallen log. She was shaking all over, and Running Wolf could see tears streaming down her cheeks. She was alive, though, and that was what mattered. As he walked toward her, Running Wolf tried to move slowly and keep his hands visible. He knew that white settlers were often afraid of his people, sometimes with good reason and sometimes because of stories they had heard. The last thing he wanted was to frighten her more than she already was. The woman looked up at him with wide eyes, clearly not sure what to expect. Running Wolf had learned a few words of English from traders who sometimes came through Lakota territory, and he used them now. "Safe," he said, pointing to the dead mountain lion. "You safe now?" He gestured to himself and then to the woman, trying to ask if she was hurt. She seemed to understand and shook her head, though she was still trembling. Running Wolf could see that she had some scratches from the thorns and maybe a few bruises, but nothing serious. The woman pointed to herself and said something that sounded like Mary or Molly. Then she pointed to him with a questioning look. Running Wolf touched his chest and said, "Running Wolf." For a moment they just looked at each other, two young people from completely different worlds, brought together by chance and danger. The woman's fear was starting to fade, replaced by something that looked like gratitude and curiosity. Running Wolf walked over to the dead mountain lion and pulled his arrow free. It was still in good condition and could be used again. He had made the arrow himself, carving the shaft from ash wood and crafting the point from flint, just as his father had taught him. As he cleaned the arrow on the grass, Running Wolf noticed that the woman was watching him carefully. She seemed fascinated by his clothes, his weapons, and the way he moved. He supposed he was probably the first Lakota person she had ever seen up close. The morning sun was getting higher now, and Running Wolf knew that other settlers might come looking for the woman if she didn't return home soon. He had seen their houses in the distance and knew roughly which direction she needed to go before they parted ways. Running Wolf remembered the rabbits he had caught in his snares earlier that morning. He had been planning to take them back to his family for the evening meal, but something told him to share them with this woman, who had nearly lost her life. He pulled one of the rabbits from his hunting bag and offered it to her. At first, she looked confused, but then she seemed to understand that it was a gift. She accepted it with a shy smile and said something in English that he didn't understand, but her tone made it clear she was saying thank you. The woman's legs gave out completely, and she sank to her knees on the forest floor. Her whole body was shaking like a leaf in the wind, and Running Wolf could see that the fear was still coursing through her veins. He had seen this before when warriors returned from dangerous hunts. Sometimes the mind needed time to catch up with what the body had just survived. Running Wolf stayed where he was for a moment, giving her space to breathe and understand that the danger had passed. He knew that moving too quickly or getting too close might frighten her even more. White settlers, he had heard from the traders, often had strange ideas about his people. Some thought they were all violent, others believed they could not be trusted. He wanted to show her that not everything she might have heard was true. The morning breeze rustled through the pine trees above them, and somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker began its rhythmic tapping. Life in the forest was slowly returning to normal, as if the deadly encounter had been just a brief interruption in the natural order of things. The woman looked up at Running Wolf with eyes that were still wide with shock, but the terror was beginning to fade. She was pretty, he noticed, in the way that white women were different from the women of his tribe. Her skin was much paler, almost like the color of birch bark, and her hair caught the sunlight in shades of brown and gold. Running Wolf pointed to the dead mountain lion and then to himself, trying to show her that he was the one who had killed it. Then he pointed to her and made a gesture that he hoped would ask if she was hurt. His English was limited to the few words he had picked up from traders over the years, but sometimes gestures could say more than words. She seemed to understand what he was asking. She looked down at her hands and arms, which were scratched from the thorns and rough bark. There was a small tear in her blue dress where it had caught on a branch, and her white apron was stained with dirt and berry juice, but she shook her head to let him know that she wasn't seriously injured. "Safe now?" Running Wolf said again, using one of the English phrases he was sure about. "You safe." The woman's breathing was starting to slow down, and some color was returning to her cheeks. She wiped tears from her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving small streaks in the dirt on her face. Then she did something that surprised Running Wolf. She smiled. It was a small, shaky smile, but it was real. She pointed to herself and spoke clearly. "Beth." Then she pointed to him with raised eyebrows, the same way people everywhere ask someone's name. "Running Wolf," he replied, touching his chest. Beth repeated his name slowly, trying to get the sounds right. Running Wolf. Her pronunciation wasn't perfect, but it was close enough. When she said it, Running Wolf found himself smiling too. There was something about the way she was trying to communicate that reminded him of children in his village. When they were learning to speak, Running Wolf walked slowly over to where Beth's berry basket had fallen. Most of the blackberries had spilled out and were scattered across the ground, but he managed to gather a handful of the ones that weren't too dirty. He brought them back to her and offered them, thinking she might be hungry or thirsty after. Her frightening experience. Beth accepted the berries gratefully and ate a few. The sweet juice seemed to help her feel better, and she managed to say "thank you" in English. Running Wolf didn't know those exact words, but her tone made the meaning clear. As Beth ate the berries, Running Wolf took a closer look at her. She was probably around his own age, maybe a year or two younger. Her hands were soft, not rough and calloused like the hands of Lakota women who worked with hides and gathered roots. This told him that she probably lived a different kind of life. One where other people did the harder work. Her dress was well made, with small buttons and careful stitching. Running Wolf had seen similar clothing on the wives of traders, and he knew it took time and skill to create such garments. Beth's family was probably not poor, at least not by white settler standards, but what struck Running Wolf most was how young and innocent she seemed. In his tribe, people learned early about the dangers of the wilderness. Children were taught from a very young age to watch for signs of predators, to move quietly, and to always be aware of their surroundings. This woman had wandered into mountain lion territory with nothing but a wicker basket. Apparently unaware of the risks, Beth finished eating the berries and seemed to be feeling stronger. She managed to stand up, though she kept one hand on the fallen log for support. Her legs were still a little unsteady, but the worst of the shock appeared to be passing. Running Wolf looked at the position of the sun through the trees. It was getting higher in the sky, and he knew that morning was moving toward midday. If Beth had family or friends, they would probably start looking for her soon if she didn't return. He had observed the settler homesteads from a distance during his hunting trips, and he had a good idea of which direction she needed to go. He pointed toward the east, where he had seen smoke rising from chimneys in recent weeks. "Home?" he asked. Using another English word he had learned, Beth looked in the direction he was pointing and nodded eagerly. "Yes, home," she said, and pointed the same way. Before they parted, Running Wolf made a decision that surprised even himself. He had been successful in checking his rabbit snares that morning, catching 2 plump rabbits that would have made a good meal for his family. But something about this encounter, about this young woman who had come so close to death, made him want to share what he had. He pulled one of the rabbits from his hunting bag and held it out to Beth. She looked confused at first, tilting her head like a bird trying to understand a new sound. Then she seemed to realize that he was offering it as a gift. Beth accepted the rabbit with both hands, and her face lit up with genuine gratitude. She said several words in English that Running Wolf didn't understand, but her tone was warm and thankful. She clutched the rabbit to her chest and looked at him with an expression that seemed to say more than any words could. Running Wolf felt something unusual in his chest, a warm feeling that he had never experienced with a white person. Before, all his life he had heard stories about the settlers, most of them not good. His elders spoke of broken promises, of land taken without permission, of his people being pushed from places their ancestors had lived for countless generations. But here was this young woman, Beth, who seemed nothing like the dangerous invaders. from the stories. She was just a person really not so different from the young women in his own village. She had been afraid, and he had helped her. She was grateful, and he found that her gratitude meant something to him. The moment stretched. Between them, two young people from completely different worlds discovering that kindness could cross any boundary. Beth carefully placed the rabbit in her berry basket, and Running Wolf could see that she understood the value of the gift. As they prepared to go their separate ways, Running Wolf felt a strange reluctance to leave. Part of him wanted to walk with Beth to make sure she reached her home safely. But he knew that appearing near the settler homesteads might cause more problems than it would solve. His presence might frighten other white people, and that could lead to trouble for both of them. Instead, he decided to follow her from a distance, staying far enough back that she wouldn't know he was there, but close enough that he could help. If she encountered any more danger, it was what his grandfather would have done: protect without being seen, help without expecting recognition. Beth walked slowly through the tall grass toward home, her legs still feeling weak from the morning's terrible encounter. The rabbit that Running Wolf had given her felt heavy in her wicker basket, but it was a good kind of heavy, the weight of unexpected kindness from someone she had been taught to fear. The sun was now high overhead, and Beth realized she had been gone much longer than she had planned. When she left the house that morning, she had told her husband Jacob that she would be back before the midday meal. He would be wondering where she was, and knowing Jacob, he would probably be getting worried and maybe even angry. As she walked, Beth kept thinking about what had just happened. The whole experience felt like something from a dream: the terrifying mountain lion, the mysterious appearance of the young Lakota warrior, and the way he had saved her life without hesitation. She touched the scratches on her arms, proof that it had all been real. Beth had lived on the frontier for 2 years now, ever since she and Jacob had moved west from Pennsylvania to claim their piece of land. But in all that time, she had never actually spoken to one of the native people. She had seen them occasionally in the distance, moving across the plains like shadows, but Jacob had always warned her to stay away from them. "They're dangerous," Jacob would say whenever the topic came up. "You can't trust them. They'll smile at you one day and scalp you the next." Beth had believed him because Jacob was her husband, and husbands were supposed to know about such things. But now she wasn't so sure Running Wolf hadn't seemed dangerous at all. Frightening at first, maybe, because he had appeared so suddenly and looked so different from anyone she had ever met. But dangerous? No, if he had wanted to hurt her, he could have easily done so when she was trapped by the mountain lion. Instead, he had risked his own life to save hers. The wooden cabin came into view through the trees, and Beth could see smoke rising from the chimney. Jacob must be inside, probably preparing his own meal since she wasn't there to cook for him. Their small farm looked peaceful in the afternoon sunlight, with their few chickens pecking around in the yard and their cow grazing in the fenced pasture. As Beth approached the house, the front door opened and Jacob stepped out onto the porch. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and rough hands from years of hard work. His brown beard was neatly trimmed, and he wore the simple clothes of a farmer: dark pants and a white shirt with suspenders. The moment Jacob saw Beth, his face changed from relief to concern to something that looked almost like anger. He hurried down from the porch and walked quickly toward her, his eyes taking in her torn dress, scratched arms, and dirt-stained apron. "Beth, where have you been?" Jacob demanded, his voice louder than usual. "I've been worried sick about you. You said you'd be back hours ago." Beth set down her basket and tried to find the right words to explain what had happened. How could she tell him about the mountain lion without frightening him? How could she explain about Running Wolf without making Jacob angry? "I'm sorry, Jacob," she began. "Something happened while I was picking berries. Something ... expected." Jacob's eyes narrowed as he looked at her more closely. He saw the scratches on her hands and arms, the tear in her dress, and the way she seemed nervous and shaken. "What kind of something? Did you fall? Were you attacked by an animal?" Beth took a deep breath. She knew she had to tell him the truth. But she also knew how Jacob felt about the native people. "I was attacked," she said slowly, "by a mountain lion. It had me trapped against a fallen log, and I thought I was going to die. Jacob's face went pale, and he immediately began examining her more carefully, looking for serious injuries. A mountain lion? Are you hurt? How did you get away? I'm not badly hurt, Beth said quickly. Just some scratches. And I got away because because someone helped me. Someone? Who? Another settler? Jacob asked, still checking her arms and face for wounds. Beth hesitated. She knew what Jacob's reaction would be, but she couldn't lie to him. It was one of the Lakota men, she said quietly. A young warrior, he killed the mountain lion and saved my life. The change in Jacob's expression was immediate and dramatic. His face went from concern to shock to something much darker. He stepped back from Beth as if she had just told him she had been touched by the devil himself. You were alone with an Indian? Jacob's voice was low and dangerous. A savage was near you, and you didn't run? Jacob, I couldn't run, Beth tried to explain. The mountain lion had me trapped. If this man hadn't helped me, I would be dead. Right now he saved my life. But Jacob wasn't listening to her explanation. His mind was racing with all the stories he had heard about Indian attacks, about settlers who had trusted the native people only to be betrayed and killed. In his world, there were no good Indians, only dangerous ones who hadn't yet shown their true nature. How do you know this wasn't some kind of trick? Jacob demanded, his voice getting louder. Maybe he was working with others. Maybe they planned the whole thing to get close to you, to learn about our defenses, to find out when I'm away from the house. Beth stared at her husband in disbelief. Jacob, that's ridiculous. He risked his own life to save mine. He could have been killed by that mountain lion. Or maybe he trained the animal, Jacob said, his paranoia growing with each word. Maybe they used those cats to hunt settlers. Did you ever think of that? That's impossible, and you know it. Beth said, her own voice rising now. No one can train a wild mountain lion. You're not thinking clearly. Jacob began pacing back and forth in front of their cabin, his hands clenched into fists. All the fears and worries that had been building up since they moved to this territory were now focused on this one incident. Every story he had heard about, Indian raids, every warning from other settlers, every sleepless night wondering if they were safe, it all came rushing back. Did he touch you? Jacob asked suddenly, stopping his pacing to stare at his wife. What? Beth was confused by the question. Did the savage put his hands on you? Did he do anything inappropriate? Beth felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. Jacob Mitchell, how dare you ask me such a thing? He was nothing but respectful. He helped me up when I fell, and he gave me this rabbit as a gift. She held up the animal from her basket. The sight of the rabbit seemed to make Jacob even more upset. He gave you a gift? Don't you see what that means? In their culture, gifts mean something. Maybe he thinks you belong to him now. Maybe he thinks he has some kind of claim on you. That's the most foolish thing I've ever heard, Beth said, her patience finally running out. He was being kind. Jacob, something you seem to have forgotten how to be. Jacob ignored her comment and continued his pacing. His mind was made up. In his view, any contact between his wife and the Lakota warrior was a threat that needed to be eliminated. The fact that the man had saved Beth's life didn't matter. What mattered was that he had been near their property, near Jacob's wife, and that was unacceptable. He'll be back, Jacob muttered, more to himself than to Beth. They always come back. Once they know where we live, once they know our routines, they'll be back. Beth watched her husband with growing alarm. She had never seen him like this before. His face was red with anger, and there was something in his eyes that frightened her. It was the look of a man who had already made a decision, and nothing she could say would change his mind. Jacob, please listen to me, Beth tried one more time. This man is not our enemy. He proved that when he saved my life. We should be grateful to him, not afraid of him. But Jacob had already stopped listening. He was thinking about his rifle, which hung above the fireplace inside their cabin. He was thinking about the box of ammunition he kept in the wooden chest beside their bed. And he was thinking about how to protect his family from what he saw as a threat that would surely return. The afternoon sun beat down on the small homestead. but Beth felt cold despite the warmth. She realized that her husband's fear was stronger than his gratitude, stronger than his love for her, and maybe even stronger than his common sense. And she began to worry about what that might mean for the kind young warrior who had saved her life. Jacob barely slept that night. Every small sound outside their cabin made him sit up in bed, his heart pounding as he listened for signs of danger. The wind rustling through the pine trees sounded like footsteps. The call of an owl seemed like a signal between unseen enemies. Even their old cow moving around in the pasture made him reach for the rifle he now kept beside the bed. Beth lay next to him, but she might as well have been 100 miles away. She could feel the tension radiating from her husband's body, and she knew that nothing she had said the day before had changed his mind. If anything, Jacob seemed more convinced than ever that the young Lakota warrior represented a threat to their family. "He knows where we live now," Jacob had muttered as they ate their evening meal. "He's probably watching us right now, planning his next move." Beth had tried once more to reason with him. "Jacob, if he wanted to hurt us, he would have done it. Yesterday, when I was alone and helpless. Instead, he saved my life." But Jacob's fear had grown too strong for logic. In his mind, he had already decided what needed to be done. When the first pale light of dawn began to creep through their small window, Jacob was already getting dressed. He moved quietly, trying not to wake Beth, but she had been lying awake for hours too. "Where are you going so early?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "To check the fence line," Jacob lied, not meeting her eyes. "One of the posts looked loose yesterday." Beth knew her husband well enough to recognize when he wasn't telling the truth. She watched as he took his rifle down from its place above the fireplace and checked to make sure it was loaded. The metal barrel gleamed in the morning light, and Beth felt a chill run down her spine. "Jacob, please don't do anything foolish," she said, sitting up in bed. "That man saved my life. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" Jacob paused at the door, his hand on the wooden handle. For a moment, Beth thought she saw doubt flicker across his face. But then his jaw tightened, and she knew the moment had passed. "I'm protecting my family," he said firmly. "That's what a husband is supposed to do." After Jacob left, Beth dressed quickly and tried to think of what she could do. She considered following him, but she didn't know exactly where he was going. She thought about running to their nearest neighbors, the Williams family who lived about 2 miles away. But by the time she got there and back with help, it might be too late. All she could do was pray that Jacob wouldn't find Running Wolf, or that if he did, somehow the encounter would end peacefully. Meanwhile, Jacob was making his way through the forest toward Willow Creek, where Beth had told him the attack happened. He moved carefully but with purpose, his rifle held ready across his chest. The morning air was cool and damp, and his breath came out in small white puffs. Jacob had convinced himself that he was doing the right thing. In his mind, he wasn't planning to murder an innocent man. He was eliminating a threat before it could harm his family. All the stories he had heard about Indian raids, all the warnings from other settlers, had combined in his thoughts to create a picture of imminent danger. He found a good hiding spot behind a large oak tree near the creek, where he had a clear view of the area where Beth said the mountain lion attack had occurred. From here, he could see the fallen logs she had described and the scattered berries that were still on the ground. Jacob settled in to wait. He was a patient man when he needed to be, and hunting had taught him how to stay still and quiet for long periods. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and forest animals began their morning routines around him. A family of squirrels chattered in the trees above his head, and somewhere nearby he could hear the gentle sound of water flowing over rocks. After what felt like hours but was probably only about one, Jacob heard the soft sound of footsteps approaching. His grip tightened on his rifle as he peered around the tree trunk. Running Wolf appeared through the trees, moving with the quiet grace that his people were known for. He carried his bow and a small hunting bag, and he seemed relaxed and unaware of any danger. He was simply going about his normal morning routine, checking the rabbit snares he had set along the creek. Jacob watched as the young Lakota warrior knelt beside one of the snares and carefully removed a rabbit that had been caught during the night. Running Wolf's movements were gentle and respectful, even toward the dead animal. He whispered something in his own language that Jacob couldn't understand, but that sounded like a prayer or thanks. For just a moment, watching Running Wolf handle the rabbit with such care, Jacob felt a flicker of uncertainty. This didn't look like a dangerous savage planning an attack. This looked like a young man going about his daily work, trying to provide food for his family just like Jacob did. But then Jacob remembered his fear from the night before, and his resolve hardened again. He couldn't afford to be weak. He couldn't afford to trust. Too much was at stake. Jacob stepped out from behind the oak tree, raising his rifle to his shoulder and pointing it directly at Running Wolf's chest. The metallic click of the gun being cocked seemed to echo through the forest like thunder. "You there?" Jacob shouted, his voice carrying across the quiet morning air. "Stay away from my wife. Stay away from my land." Running Wolf looked up in surprise, his hands freezing in the act of placing the rabbit in his hunting bag. He had been so focused on his work that he hadn't heard Jacob approaching. Now he found himself staring down the barrel of a rifle held by a man whose face was twisted with fear and anger. Even though Running Wolf couldn't understand all the English words, Jacob was shouting. The meaning was clear enough. This white man was Beth's husband, and he was very angry about what had happened the day before. The rifle pointed at his chest left no doubt about the man's intentions. Running Wolf slowly raised his hands, palms open in the universal gesture of peace. He had dealt with frightened white settlers before, and he knew that sudden movements could be deadly in situations like this. "Friend," Running Wolf said in English, using one of the few words he knew. He pointed toward the spot where he had killed the mountain lion, trying to remind Jacob of what had actually happened. "Help, woman, But Jacob was beyond listening to explanations. His fear had transformed into a kind of madness that made him see threats everywhere. In his mind, Running Wolf's attempt to communicate was just another trick, another way to get close enough to attack. "I don't want to hear your lies," Jacob yelled, his finger moving toward the trigger. "You people are all the same. You act friendly until you get the chance to strike." Running Wolf could see the fear and hatred in Jacob's eyes, and he understood that this man was past the point of reason. He began to back away slowly, hoping to reach the safety of the thick forest before Jacob decided to shoot, but Jacob followed him, keeping the rifle trained on Running Wolf's chest. The two men moved in a deadly dance through the trees, one backing away and the other advancing, both knowing that this confrontation could end in violence at any moment. Running Wolf's mind raced as he tried to think of a way out of this situation. He could probably disappear into the forest if he could just get a little more distance, but Jacob was staying too close. And Running Wolf didn't want to run anyway. That might only convince Jacob that he really was guilty of something. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting dancing shadows on the forest floor, as the two men faced each other across a divide much wider than the few feet of ground between them. It was a divide made of fear, misunderstanding, and the tragic inability of two different peoples to see each other as simply human. Jacob's finger tightened on the trigger of his rifle. The metal felt cold against his skin, and his hands were beginning to shake slightly from the tension of holding the heavy weapon steady for so long. Running Wolf stood about 20 feet away, his hands still raised, his dark eyes watching Jacob's face carefully. The forest around them had gone completely silent, as if even the birds and squirrels could sense the danger in the air. The only sound was Jacob's heavy breathing and the distant babble of Willow Creek flowing over its rocky bed. Running Wolf could see the fear and confusion in the white man's eyes. He had encountered frightened settlers before, but this was different. This man wasn't just scared, he was desperate, like a cornered animal that might do anything to protect itself. Running Wolf knew that one wrong move, one misunderstood gesture, could end his life. Jacob's mind was racing with conflicting thoughts. Part of him wanted to pull the trigger and end what he saw as a threat to his family. But another part of him, a quieter voice that sounded like his mother's teachings from long ago, whispered that murder was wrong, no matter what the reason. "Please," Running Wolf said softly, using another English word he had learned from traders. No help Daman. Yesterday, the young warrior's voice was calm and steady, without any trace of the anger or violence that Jacob had expected. This confused Jacob even more. Weren't savages supposed to be fierce and threatening? Why did this one seem so peaceful? For a moment, Jacob's resolve wavered. He remembered Beth's words from the day before, how she had insisted that running Wolf had saved her life. He thought about the rabbit the warrior had given her, which they had cooked and eaten for their evening meal. It had been good meat, prepared with care, but then Jacob's fears surged back, stronger than ever. What if this was all an act? What if running Wolf was just pretending to be peaceful until Jacob let his guard down? The stories he had heard about. Indian attacks always started with the natives seeming friendly and trustworthy. "You're not fooling me," Jacob said, his voice shaking with emotion. "I know what you're planning. I know why you're really here." Running Wolf shook his head slowly, not understanding all the words but recognizing the anger and suspicion in Jacob's tone. He pointed again toward the place where the mountain lion had attacked Beth, then touched his own chest and made a gesture. "Like drawing a bow. Save," Running Wolf said desperately. "Save woman." Just as Jacob was about to respond, the sound of crashing footsteps came through the forest behind him. Someone was running toward them, breaking branches and making no attempt to move quietly. Jacob's head snapped around in alarm, thinking that more Lakota warriors might be coming to help Running Wolf. But the person who burst through the trees was Beth, her long skirts torn by thorns and her face flushed red from running. She had followed. The sound of voices through the forest, praying that she wouldn't be too late to prevent a tragedy. "Jacob, no!" Beth screamed as she saw the rifle pointed at Running Wolf. "Don't you dare shoot that man!" The sudden appearance of his wife startled Jacob so badly that he nearly dropped his weapon. "Beth, what are you doing here? Get back to the house where it's safe?" "I'm not going anywhere," Beth said firmly, positioning herself between her husband and Running Wolf. "If you want to shoot him, you'll have to shoot me first." Jacob stared at his wife in shock. In all their years of marriage, Beth had never defied him so directly. She was breathing hard from her run through the forest, and there were tears streaming down her cheeks, but her voice was strong and determined. "Beth, get out of the way," Jacob said, his voice pleading now rather than angry. "You don't understand how dangerous this is." "I understand perfectly," Beth replied. "I understand that you're about to murder the man who saved my life. I understand. That fear has made you forget everything decent about yourself." Behind Beth, Running Wolf watched this exchange with fascination and growing hope. He couldn't understand the words, but he could see that the white woman was protecting him, just as he had protected her from the mountain lion. There was something beautiful about this reversal that touched his heart. "He's not our enemy, Jacob," Beth continued, her voice becoming gentler as she saw the confusion and pain in her husband's eyes. "Look at him, really look at him. Does he look like someone who wants to hurt us?" Jacob did look at Running Wolf, really look at him for the first time. What he saw was a young man not much different from himself, someone trying to make a living, trying to survive in a difficult world. Running Wolf's clothes were simple but well made, his bow was a tool for hunting rather than war, and his face showed intelligence and kindness rather than cruelty. But the stories, Jacob said weakly. "All the warnings we've heard, Some of those stories might be true," Beth acknowledged. "But this man is not responsible for what others have done. Judge him by his own actions, not by the color of his skin or the clothes he wears." Jacob's arms were getting tired from holding the heavy rifle, and slowly, almost without realizing it, he began to lower the weapon. The deadly tension that had filled the forest clearing began to ease. Though it didn't disappear completely, Running Wolf sensed the change in the atmosphere, and took a small step backward, though he kept his hands visible and his movements slow and non-threatening. He looked at Beth with an expression of deep gratitude, understanding that she had risked her own safety to protect him. "Thank you," Running Wolf said to Beth, pronouncing the English words carefully. Then he looked at Jacob and repeated, "Thank you." Jacob was confused. "Why is he thanking me?" "I was about to..." He's thanking you because you chose not to shoot, Beth explained. He's thanking you for being the good man I know you really are. The three of them stood there in the forest clearing for a long moment, each processing what had just happened. The crisis had passed, but they all knew that something fundamental had changed. They had looked across the divide between their peoples and seen each other as human beings rather than as threats or enemies. Running Wolf slowly reached into his hunting bag and pulled out the second rabbit he had caught that morning. He walked carefully toward Jacob and Beth, moving slowly so as not to alarm them, and offered the rabbit as a gift. Jacob looked at the rabbit, then at Running Wolf's face. The young warrior's expression was open and honest, without any trace of deception or hidden agenda. For the first time, Jacob began to understand what Beth had been trying to tell him. He's offering us food, Beth said softly. It's a gesture of friendship. Jacob hesitated for a long moment, then slowly reached out and accepted the rabbit. As their hands briefly touched during the exchange, Jacob felt something he hadn't expected, the recognition that Running Wolf was just another person trying to take care of his family. Thank you, Jacob said awkwardly. Not sure if Running Wolf would understand, but needing to say the words anyway. Running Wolf smiled and nodded, then began to back away toward the deeper forest. He had accomplished what he came for, checking his snares and gathering food for his people. But more than that, he had helped bridge a gap between two worlds that too often saw each other as enemies. As Running Wolf disappeared into the trees, Jacob and Beth stood together in the clearing. Jacob felt ashamed of his fear and anger, but also strangely relieved. He had come so close to doing something terrible, something that would have haunted him for the rest of his life. I'm sorry, Jacob said to his wife. You were right about him. Beth took her husband's hand and squeezed it gently. We all have fears, Jacob. What matters is what we choose to do with them. They walked home through the forest together, carrying the rabbit that Running Wolf had given them. That evening, as they prepared and shared the meal, they talked about what had happened and what it might mean for their future in this new land. From that day forward, Jacob never again spoke of the Lakota people as enemies or savages. He had learned that courage sometimes meant putting down your weapon rather than picking it up, and that the greatest danger often came not from others, but from the fear and hatred in your own heart. And sometimes, when he was working in his fields, Jacob would see a figure moving in the distance across the plains. He knew it was Running Wolf, watching over the area, protecting travelers and settlers alike from the real dangers of the wilderness. Jacob would raise his hand in greeting, and the distant figure would raise his hand in return. Two men from different worlds who had learned to see each other as neighbors rather than enemies.